talk about emotions today and how they play into financial decisions that folks make.
Emotions definitely come into play a lot. I see that a lot with clients. We try to be as logical as we can with our decisions, but it's very difficult to ignore a lot of the emotional reactions we have to news and other people around us. So this is definitely a very important topic.
I've got, clients that come to me with a ton of credit card debt and they want to do a 15-year mortgage, which obviously is illogical, but psychologically they think that makes sense. Got folks who want to make a huge down payment when they're buying a house, but they have very little retirement savings. Plenty of people, especially renters, who think that the housing market is going to crash. So why should I buy a house now? Let me wait until the market crashes and then I'll dive in. In the meantime, they're throwing away thousands of dollars each month in rent. Folks who think that interest rates, or they want to wait for interest rates to come down before they buy a house, as opposed to buying now and simply refinancing later. So I see it all day, every day, and I'm sure the same is true for you.
Yeah, I'd say the most common example is definitely in the investment world when, everyone knows the expression that you should be buying low and selling high, but when it comes down to actually seeing your account value dropping and you keep hearing all the fear and panic in the markets, it's a very common trend to want to sell once it's already gone down a good amount, thinking that it might go down further and you want to avoid that. But that typically, a lot of studies and research has shown that people tend to make the wrong decisions in those moments. We tend to get very emotional when we see our account balances dropping. And so avoiding that is definitely one of the most common examples that I have, and definitely makes a huge difference on returns for investors in general.
We've talked about this before, but one of the reasons working with a financial professional like yourself is to have somebody in a client's corner who can kind of talk them through this, talk them off the ledge, if you will, from making bad emotional decisions.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's one of the most impactful things that financial planners and financial advisors offer. It's hard to put a value on that, but they've done some studies on just the difference in returns between investors who work with one and those who don't. And a lot of times it's often several percent that it can lead to in difference just from having someone that kind of talks you down off that ledge, like you mentioned, especially with social media nowadays and news. There's so much negativity and just fear in the markets in general. And so having that person who's kind of looking at it from a logical perspective and trying to be a fiduciary and keep your best interests in mind, I think that really helps. And just having that person to talk to and hold you accountable and make sure you're hearing the other side of it rather than everything in the news and the social media world, I think that makes a huge difference.
So whether a client is working with somebody like you, a financial professional, or they're just trying to do things on their own, any thoughts about how folks can develop better, healthier financial habits around this?
Yeah, I think the biggest tip is trying to avoid those things as much as possible. I'm not saying you have to cut social media completely, but trying not to watch the news every day or being on social media and just seeing those things. You don't often hear a lot of good news in those areas. And so I think avoiding that, trying not to look at your investment statements too often. It's important to review things regularly, but you don't want to be in there every day checking how your accounts are doing and reviewing the markets, wondering if we should do something. A lot of these plans, especially when you're working with a financial planner, we're looking at a much more long-term perspective. And so we don't want to make these rash short-term decisions trying to time the market. Typically that ends up leading to worse results. So I think trying to avoid that, trying to just know that, you have a plan in place, we're sticking to the plan. What happens in the short term, we're not too worried about that. I think that's the biggest advice I can give.
Let's talk about goals for a second. So in my experience, folks who have set up long-term financial goals tend to handle these types of decisions and emotions and psychology a little bit better. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
One of the first things that I recommend, and one of the first steps we do with clients, is really defining what our goals are and getting very clear on that. Because I think if you don't have a plan in place, you're not really working towards anything. It makes it a lot more difficult to stay on the path you want to get on and get to the point you're really trying to get to. And so I think setting those plans in place, getting as clear as you can with amounts, timelines, whether a great example is buying a house, trying to really figure out where you want to buy it, how much you're going to need for that, what your kind of timeline is for that. I think all of those things make it a lot easier and a lot clearer and easier to define how much you need to save and whether or not you're still on track. So I think the more clear you can get on all of that, the easier it makes it, the more motivation you have when it comes to those tougher emotional situations.
So in conclusion, a few steps that you've talked about. One is be wary of social media and things that are being said. Get off the news and, again, let the hype train flow through. Have a financial professional in your corner. Sounds like a very important piece of the puzzle. And then setting goals, both short-term and long-term financial goals. Anything else that we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I would say, there's definitely another aspect of this that comes into play based on how a lot of us were raised. We had different upbringings, we were taught different things about money. So, people that typically didn't come for money, there's a lot of different situations we come across where people are either scared to spend or worried about the markets, whatever the case may be. It sounds like you've dealt with that on the mortgage side where, oh, home prices are crazy, we're not going to buy right now. So I think there's a lot of those implicit things that we've just grown up with and are kind of just instilled in us that we might not realize. And so identifying those, figuring out kind of where your fears lie and whether or not they're rational or not. I think that's another thing that either a financial planner can help with, or, talking with someone else that you trust or anyone else, family, friends. I think kind of hearing other perspectives can help, and especially people that grew up in different situations, different environments. So getting that exposure to those other perspectives, I think, helps a lot and can kind of help you define what fears are rational and which ones aren't.
That's interesting. If I could throw one more question your way, I've some of my older clients tend to be so conservative that they won't spend money. Not only clients, but frankly, my own parents who financially are pretty well off, but if they have to go spend $25 to fix up a lock or something, they're freaking out. And so it's almost as though they're at one end of the spectrum versus, some folks who just spend as much as you can possibly spend. But any advice you would give to people who are so conservative, even though they're in a great financial situation, but psychologically, because of their upbringing or beliefs or whatever, they're just super hesitant to spend money?
Yeah, that's a very common situation we come across. I think it's a very weird transition for a lot of people to go from earning your whole life at a job to retiring and then just spending and not having a real income coming in. And so that can be a very weird feeling for a lot of people. And so I think, again, having people that have gone through that, or a financial planner who deals with a lot of clients who are going through a similar situation, to kind of help guide you through that. Or, if you have friends that have been in a similar situation, it's definitely, a lot of times these are older people who have had these habits for a long time. It can be really hard to break. So I think just connecting with, talking with other people that have gone through a similar situation, I think that's kind of the easiest way to learn about how to get out of that habit and learn how to actually start spending the money that you worked so hard for. So,
Matt, thanks so much for imparting so much knowledge on us again. It was great talking with you as always. And if you're out there and want to get more information about the psychology around money or want to get help with any of these topics, feel free to reach out to either Matt or myself.
Yeah, thanks again, Michael. It was great talking with you.